Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Mike Show, presented by Media U. Today's guest is a streamer and YouTuber whose content focuses on roleplay and storytelling through historical-based strategy games. He creates his content live alongside large groups of other players that he coordinates games with. His content is unique, thoughtful, and brings a spark of life to these games that I think many people have not seen done before. Please welcome to the show, Hammurabae. Yeah, again, thanks for doing this. I'm really excited. I was actually in Chip Dibson's stream last night talking to some of his chat. I was like, hey, I'm talking to Hammurabae tomorrow. If you guys have any questions, if you want me to ask him. And they were all...
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were all pretty stoked. You're very well thought of in that little world.
That's great to hear. I mean, Chip's a great guy. I'm curious, how do you know him? Because he was the one who, obviously connected us. So
I know Chip in real life. We are friends. We actually used to live together.
Really?
Yeah. So we're, pretty close. I would love to just kind of start off, like, how did you decide to start streaming or making content? Like, how long have you been doing it, and, kind of what sparked that idea?
Yeah, so for me, I started, I think, around 2 years ago. I got going initially because I was seeing someone at the time who was a streamer, and she recommended that I try it out because I've always sort of played games. I've done a lot of performance art and things like that. I did a little bit of like theater and things like that, and she recommended I try it out, and I did. And it was really enjoyable because, being able to do something you enjoy is a lot of fun. But when you do that and you can do it with other people and you kind of see that people enjoy you doing it, it's a really unique, fun feeling that kind of, I suppose, validates what you enjoy. So I got going around 2 years ago. I started off streaming initially on the Twitch platform. I started off obviously very small. I streamed to 0-1 people for, I'd say, a good 2 months or so, just kind of talking to myself, which, anyone who has ever tried to do that knows it can be a little bit tough, and there's points where you will question it a bit. But, after a while, people started to watch and interact with me, and it became much more interactive. I stayed on Twitch purely for probably around 3 months. A couple of our content creators recommend I get a YouTube channel, and I tried that out initially. I just uploaded my VODs essentially to start off with, just really simple stuff. But over time, I found other content creators who were kind of doing the stuff that I liked, which was more storytelling-based content and things like that. And I realized that I could start to do that myself. And it was a case of I was starting to do something I really enjoyed. There was more of a story aspect to things. It was becoming more interactive. And I just felt like I could do a lot more of it. So I went down the editing rabbit hole, watched ridiculous amounts of YouTube videos, read a book or two about how to edit, how to kind of make a story and things like that. And then slowly over time, started to make things a little bit less linear and boring and just kind of slow, which is, I think, the innate struggle you have when you do more long form content, kind of like what I tend to do. Because I'll stream for, I'd say 3 on the low end to sometimes like 8 or 9 hours. I mean, they're very long. And for most people, you're not going to sit through 8 hours of a guy doing poor accents and trying to role play something out or something like that. I mean, the average person won't do that, and they shouldn't. So,
So you edit all the content yourself?
Yeah. So I tried once or twice to work with an editor. For me, it's a case of they didn't know my content as well as myself, and plus it's expensive, So in the end, I just kind of do everything myself. Plus, I see it as you're building a skill set, as a streamer, as a content creator, as a YouTube. There's so many skills that you need to learn, and they're all useful. So, I mean, I kind of felt I was doing a disservice to myself not building that skill set because, one, it's useful just to have for the rest of your life, and two, you will make better stuff if you know it very well yourself. I mean, even if you end up getting someone to do it for you, if you've learned that skill set, you will know what to communicate to them about what to change and like what you need, obviously. So.
That's awesome. Yeah. Because I've watched some of your videos, and like some of them can be pretty extensive in the editing, like, a lot of voiceover stuff, a lot of like graphics or like little bits of like different art you throw in and stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely, I always debate with myself how much editing to do. There's a few books I've read on YouTube and content creation and stuff who say, you got to find that balance between editing too much, and then editing not enough. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you are trying to make something that looks really good. And a high degree of editing is nice, but there's a bit of a balance between over-editing there, too. So, I mean, recently I started to do more narrative story-based stuff and started to do voiceovers and add a lot more like video in there and things like that. But initially I did way too much. I think there's a video where I did like a 6-minute intro to like a 25-minute video. And looking back on it, it's just like, man, I can't believe people actually watched through all that. I don't know if I would. So, it changes.
So how would you describe your content to like someone who is completely unfamiliar with you? Because it's kind of like this little niche world of like historical role play, but also like you run games with like tons of different gamers. Like you've run games with up to like 70 people, right?
Yeah. So for example, the upcoming game we're starting on Saturday, which is the one we've consistently do. It's like a modern day sort of setting. We're at, I think, almost 90 signups for that game. And I mean,
wow,
it's a lot. When I started out, I did all this myself. I built a Discord. I brought people in. There's always an interest in doing these sorts of games. And over time, I built up a staff for it, but I won't get too much into that. But it's a lot to coordinate this stuff, but I really enjoy it. But to the average person in terms of like, or the normal person who wouldn't know this kind of stuff, right? Because this is very niche. What I do is very niche. The way I would sort of put it is if you watch stuff in the gaming space, if you watch things like Twitch, if you've seen big streamers, the closest thing you've probably seen is maybe something like GTA roleplay or Red Dead roleplay. Those would be the ones I always go to. When I try to explain what I do without sounding like a crazy person, that's what I tend to go to. Which is that you have like a game which innately is story-based and it gives you options to express yourself. Some people play games just to shoot things, to just watch the story kind of go. But there's many people who would much rather get themselves into that world and put themselves into it. So you have something like GTA roleplay where you have someone who will go into like a multiplayer, server with other players. They'll have like a character, sometimes with very elaborate backstories, describing who they are, where they come from, their motivations and all that kind of stuff. It's almost like you're writing a book for some people. And you interact with other players who are doing the same thing. It's like, a bunch of like theater folks get together in a digital world and play things out. I do specifically a niche for strategy games and for historical games, which is not for everyone. I will say that. It can be a little tough, but they're games that seek to simulate historical eras to varying degrees. I mainly do Paradox games. There's a studio from Sweden, if you haven't heard of them. They try and come off as a small game company, but they're a multi-billion-dollar company. They've done very well. And they have a number of games. They've got like one set in like the medieval era, the World War II era, the space era, and things like that. So what I do is I will host games, usually ranging from 10 to 80 players in one of these strategy games, where everyone will go in as like the leader of a country, a character, a family, and they'll role play out stories. In the beginning, it was just players coming together, and putting on a bit of a silly accent and kind of, trying to talk things out and stuff like that. That's where it got started. But nowadays, it's gotten pretty elaborate. I mean, I have a Discord with, I think around 2,500 people now, and some of them are just casual writers. Like for example, the game starting Saturday with all those players, it hasn't started. It starts on Saturday, and there are well over 100 posts on the Discord written. Some of them are paragraphs long describing their policies, their countries, their leaders, what they're planning to do and stuff. So yeah, it's very niche content. But the way I would put it simply is kind of like character acting in a video game in the strategy niche.
That's awesome. Yeah, it almost feels like kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, but like historical fiction setting.
Exactly.
That's super cool. So like, man, I just can't imagine having to wrangle 90 gamers into a game. I mean, I think I mentioned in Chip's chat last time, I was like, it sounds like running a daycare almost. Like it's like,
I have a staff for it. I mentioned that already. And there's a couple people who have applied who, in extra comments, they put, I used to work with kids, or I worked in a daycare. This applies directly, and it is true. Some people are very mature. A lot of them aren't. And it is a little bit of a case of, it can be a little tough to get people to want to coordinate and work together. But that's where systems come in, right? An organization. So
right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, you can see from my hat, I've played Dungeons and Dragons, and even getting like 4 or 5 people to like meet once a week can be a nightmare. So 90 people all over the world, different time zones, I'm sure, like wrangling that. That's super impressive to me that you were able to do that.
It's a lot of work, and where it is at right now, I could not run this alone. Like if this was just me doing it, I'd pull out my hair and delete the server and walk off,
Right.
into the sunset. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who just love this stuff. They love the character acting. They love the writing. They love the game so much that's what makes it doable in terms of people who are willing to help out and organize it. But people who are willing to play in them and realize, like, this isn't just some like Roblox server, or this isn't just, some hectic thing. Like I need to be a little mature here. And I think it's people's sheer love for what they're doing and the games that kind of makes it more doable. In some other places, I don't think it would be as feasible.
Yeah, yeah. Have you always kind of been drawn to this like historical type setting? Like, were you a big history buff growing up? Like, what kind of drew you to this world?
Yeah, so I got raised a little, I would say, abnormally. I was homeschooled from a very young age, and my parents taught me, my mother primarily, and she was all about self-learning in the context of finding what you want to do and then learning through that. So all of her subjects when I was growing up were basically done through the subject that I really loved. And for me, that was always history. I remember when I was really young, probably 4 or 5, 6, reading some of those like really just big picture history books that showed like a breakdown of like, like a Roman agora or something like that, or like a medieval village in Europe, and just being fascinated by it. So history has always just been incredible to me, and I've read extensively from a very young age. And then I got down the D&D rabbit hole. I don't know if you went down it early, but it was pretty early for me. I had a friend come over when I think I was 9. I just moved to the U.S., and he brought over his brother's D&D book, and he just wanted to play a little bit of it, and I just fell in love with that thing. And whenever he came over, I'd want to play D&D. To the point it probably hurt our friendship a little bit, but I just got a little obsessed with it. So, I mean, those things kind of came together very quickly for me. I mean, I DM'd a lot because I think, much like many really hardcore D&D players when you're younger, it's kind of hard to find a group that you don't have to run yourself. So
right.
I tend to DM a lot of games. And for me, I got to combine my love of history and then my love of role-playing by, building just really complex worlds for people to kind of enjoy and things like that with that. So it was from a very young age. And history is just, it's a look into the past that I just find to be incredible. It's the history of our entire species. I mean, every aspect of it informs where we're at right now, and every aspect of it, anyone you were related to experienced in some way. And for me, I don't know, I find that to just be so fascinating, which is why something like this just is so appealing for me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was much later to the D&D train. I only got into it like right before COVID, but luckily with COVID, me and my roommates, we like binged that for, a good year. I think we were doing like 2 or 3 campaigns at once. So like we would do like 3 days during the week, and it was like we would have to like be like, wait, which campaign did this happen? Like, wait, which
did you have different characters, or were they all kind of the similar ones?
Yeah, it was like different characters. I think even different systems too. So it's just like,
oh wow, yeah,
we were doing like 5e, 3.5e, and then like some like sci-fi different version of D&D that was.
You jumped off the deep end then. I mean,
yeah, no, I mean, I love it. It's super fun. It was like, I kind of wish I had learned about it when I was younger, because I probably would have really been into it. But yeah, and I think a big thing with D&D, and it sounds like probably a similar thing with your world, is it's like all about the group. Because if you get a group that just isn't vibing, the experience can be kind of, I don't know, maybe not cringe, but just a little bit, kind of like pulling teeth sometimes. Yeah, I guess that makes me think like about your community, and like, how do you balance, like, I'm sure occasionally you have the bad egg or something that comes in and maybe kind of tries to make it a little tough for everyone. So how do you balance all those dynamics, especially with like 90 people?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, you've been a part of D&D groups too, because you know this very well. Even if there's one bad person or one person who just doesn't vibe with the group, maybe you're all sort of neutral-ish, but then there's that one guy who wants to do the horrible stuff all the time. It's just like, oh, come on, man. I get it. It's your character, but bring it back in, kind of thing. With the group I run, it has been tough. I say this a lot. There were many times I had my cursor on the delete server button, because it was stressful in the beginning to run a group like that. Because when you have these big games of people, especially for the historical crowd online, and they're there's some pretty extreme views in that crowd sometimes. There's some pretty extreme folks. I mean, we're talking far right stuff. They're very popular in those communities. You have to really draw a line in the sand and put your foot down. What I think made the server I built become easier is obviously having a great staff who helps me do what I do. I mean, I couldn't do it without that, just period. Time-wise alone was kind of setting yourself apart. That space in those communities, they tend to be pretty toxic. They tend to allow for a lot of horrible stuff, and they tend to be just gross spaces. That's why I made my server originally and didn't just go to another one, is I experienced, a lot of racism, homophobia, just constant sexism and stuff, and I and many other people have no desire to surround themselves by that sort of stuff. It's just gross. So I think in the end, it made it hard in the beginning, but what made it easier eventually was drawing the line in the sand and making it clear we were not going to be like that we would not tolerate any of that stuff. A zero tolerance policy, a staff and people who are willing to also just enforce that day after day and ensure that there's none of that toxicity. And it will get through. We do get bad eggs, like you said, who will find a way in. We have a lot of times people who will come in, seem really nice, and then they'll stay or do something horrible when they kind of get in a little bit deeper. And that sort of stuff never goes away. But if you have the right people in place, the right systems in place to ensure that you can watch over that, you can kind of stop it. And as I said, building a space like that is so different and that has a more positive community, I think our community is very positive, and that's something I've been really proud to see happen. It makes it so that people will also defend it, because any group has a culture. And ours is at the point now that when toxic people or people who want to screw around come in, I mean, sometimes staff doesn't even have to do anything. It's the people themselves who will be like, hey, that's not going to happen, So that took time, obviously. I mean, I've been running that server aspect of what I do for probably around a year now. And I'd say it was the last three or 4 months that we're finally in a place where things are really calm and they function really well. But in the beginning, I can tell you, it was pretty stressful.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I've been in the dark corners of the internet with kind of folks like that. Like, I've been in the debate sphere a little bit, and it's just like, yeah, it can be really toxic. But that's cool that it seems like that you mentioned that your community kind of self-polices that a little bit now, because it's kind of become a, its own little thing. I mean, 2,500 people, that's not a small number for a community at all.
It's one of those things of, I think there's always a desire for certain spaces, and there's always a desire for a positive place. And if that doesn't exist and someone makes it, the right people will innately kind of be drawn towards that, I think. So,
yeah. Do you mind talking a little bit about your staff and your community? Because that's something I find super interesting. Is like how the sausage is made here. So I assume it's a lot of mods, right? In your Discord, and how many people do you have? What's kind of the structure of that community?
Yeah, so I'll go a little bit into detail with it. I'm not a naturally really organized person. I have ADHD. I struggle a lot with organization. I'm very good with ideas, but when it comes to practically building something, I've struggled with that. And the way I structured originally was I ran a dictatorial state. That's what I like to say. In the first couple months, it was just me. I just really put my foot down. I didn't build good systems and stuff, but I realized that wasn't sustainable. I couldn't do this myself. I have to work. I have other things in my life. I have relationships. I can't put all this time into this, even though I like it a lot. And so I decided to build a structure. I've done a lot of work in politics. I studied politics in college. I originally planned to go into it. I worked in campaigns and stuff. So I knew a little bit how to build systems. I walked into it way too confident. I will say that. I'd been used to dealing with people who were very old, very mature, wanted something to do well. And that's not what was really there in the beginning. So what I decided to build was, like you mentioned, D&D and how it kind of plays into this. I kind of used that as an inspiration. And I realized for these games, you're basically running a big D&D campaign, There's a bunch of people. It's way bigger in scale, of course, 20 to 80 people. It's a lot. But the same concepts apply. So I made a system, what I call game controllers, which is basically dungeon master meets rule master. So these are people I originally trained myself, and now my staff trains to basically act as almost like a dungeon master in these games. Now, they're not making a linear story like a DM will do. A DM will stay up all night working hard to make a good story for you, interesting characters, villains, all that sort of stuff. A good DM will do that. Here we don't do that as much. A game controller will act as NPCs or stuff like that, characters to kind of move things along. They'll put out little story posts now and then to kind of keep things moving if needed, but their main job is just to observe, ensure that good quality role play is being done, that players are being positive, resolve any disputes between players, kind of act as a mediator. I always say that, our first thing shouldn't just be to run in and yell at people. Our first thing should be to try and mediate and try and help those players figure it out, because, if you teach players to work together and to cooperate, because, most people that we get, they're consistent. They play in a lot of our games. Like, a lot of our players, they put a lot of time into what we do. It's kind of, it's crazy. So try to teach them to resolve things is number one. So we've got a number of those now. In the beginning, we didn't have many. I think now we have, around a dozen game controllers. My staff is around almost 50 people. It's a lot.
Wow, that's amazing.
Things, yeah. But that's the core. That's the pillar of like the organization is the game controllers. Like, the community doesn't run without them. The games don't run really well without them. So that's the core bit.
Wow, that's so amazing though. 50 people, because the last interview I did was Dr. K. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah,
We got a little into his staff, and his staff, he has one of the biggest staffs on Twitch, and it's not that much bigger than that. So
really,
that's amazing that you've grown a community that not only that you've gotten so many people, but that it seems like everyone, like you said, even the players put so much time into it that they're clearly passionate about it. Because that's been a theme of kind of all the interviews I've done, because I've interviewed streamers from content creators from 100 subs on YouTube to 1 million, and it's all the people who I've seen are quote unquote successful, which doesn't always mean sub count, but just continue to do it, continue to put out content. They're just super passionate about what they do, and it seems like not only you and your staff are super passionate about it, but the whole community. So that's super awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of passion. It'll really blow me away at times, because I love doing this stuff. I put a lot of time into it, but I know for me, I'm always honest. I built this community for people, and I knew I always wanted a place like this, but it also does help my own content creation, right? It helps my YouTube, it helps my Twitch and stuff. But, I can understand me putting in a lot of time, but sometimes I will just be very surprised with what people will do. What we started to have recently in the community is people who will not only make interesting role plays and stories and stuff, but they'll do the art for it too. And some of it's incredible. It'll look like a historical document. It'll look like a sci-fi communication and stuff like that. And I've edited, art on Photoshop. I know that takes a lot of time. And sometimes I'll see a post on there, and I just have to stop and be like, wow, you're dedicated. I respect it, but my gosh, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's it makes me think as a dungeon master, you come to the game, and every player has not only drawn their character, but written a 10-page backstory on everything. If you have a group that's that into it, it's going to be fun for everyone.
Yeah. That's what keeps it so enjoyable for me. Passion. I'm passionate about the subject. I'm passionate about making it. I'm passionate about, making content for it. But it makes it so much easier when you see people with that level or more. Sometimes, and it's just, I don't know. It's really, it makes it easier. That's for sure. It's impressive sometimes.
So do you ever run into language issues? Are you playing pretty much with all English speaking people, or are there sometimes people that come in and don't even speak English and you have to find a way to moderate all that?
Well, thankfully, English is so widely spoken, especially people on the internet. I think it's
right
in most spaces. It is the primary language. We do have a lot of accents. Our server is primarily actually European. I'd say that's the lion's share of the players, and all those different languages and stuff like that. Heavy accents, people who can't speak a lot of English, that is very common. I make it very clear, we make it very clear that the server is English. You got to know how to speak it a little bit. If you struggle, if you don't know English really well, but you can communicate a bit, that's fine. I make it very clear that you should not bully or talk down to a player because they can't speak a language. If they are able or trying to speak more than one language, we need to try and help them and embrace that, and even be a place where they can improve on that, right? But there are issues with the communication, primarily accents and things like that. Because, any one game, you'll have players from, I'd say half a dozen to a dozen European countries, obviously Americans, and then a scattering of players from all over the world. So there are language issues, but if you just can't speak English, I do say that it's probably not the best place. And I feel bad about that, but there's no way to logistically do that. So
yeah, maybe AI translators will start to, sweep the internet.
Yeah, things like ChatGPT, OpenAI. I mean, we're on the cusp of all sorts of crazy stuff. So absolutely.
Yeah. You can maybe use that to help moderate or something in your Discord.
Yeah.
When you're first starting out, like, were there any like content creators or other streamers that kind of inspired you in a way, or that whose content you consumed and were like, I want to kind of mimic a little bit of that?
Yeah, the guy who originally got me into roleplay, or I saw just inspired me, is a streamer and a YouTuber named Tommy Cave. He's really popular in the space I inhabit, the strategy and the content creation space there. He's kind of, especially for Hearts of Iron, which is what I got started with, he is the big guy. And he did, I saw a couple of his YouTube roleplay videos to start off with. The kind of roleplay that started with that stuff was very simple. It was just accents. It was really memey. It was really jokey, and his stuff just was entertaining. Like I remember seeing his first videos and I was just laughing like so much. I was like, oh man, this looks freaking fun. So I tested it out and stuff. And in the beginning, he really didn't inspire me to kind of do stuff because he had great editing. He's such a strong personality. He's this German guy, very loud, very aggressive. So just very entertaining. And the roleplay stuff he did was hilarious. So he got me into it initially. But the guy who in the middle to now really keeps me inspired, and I just look to his work like, wow, is a guy named Surreal Entertainment. If you like role playing, if you like strategy spaces, this guy is great. I mean, he's like the standard for it. I look at his stuff and it's just so great. He does single player role play, kind of what I do. He doesn't do multiplayer. He does single player, but has the ability to take like a strategy game, which innately you don't think is story based, and just turn it into such an engaging story where the characters feel alive. The story plays out in such interesting ways, and it's attached to a game that innately is kind of difficult for that. He has been such an inspiration for me. I always watch his stuff, and I use it to inspire my own content. I don't like to try and use what he does because I want to kind of make my own stuff. But it's just, I mean, I love watching his stuff, and he definitely inspires me kind of to go further into it. Because I started off very simple. I didn't do the kind of more deeper role play I do now. I didn't even know if it was doable. I thought it could be, but I saw his stuff, his content, his videos. So I'm like, wow, okay, this is really doable.
That's awesome. Yeah. And now you're at a point where you're like inspiring other people in this space. And it's because I know Chip was like, because I actually, funny enough, I would just ask Chip, I was like, hey, would you want to do the podcast? And he was like, yeah, for sure. But honestly, you should talk to this guy because he's like my inspiration. And I was like, oh yeah, I would love to talk to him. And then I checked out some of your stuff and I was like, yeah, this is really cool.
It's really cool. I mean, I'm glad that he feels inspired to do that. I'm glad that other people do. I mean, that's a cool feeling,
So what is your like schedule? Like, do you have one day of like each of these types of games, or like how do you, I know you have like, you said you have once a week you do a big game and then do some smaller games throughout the week.
I switched around a lot, kind of how I did that. When I started out, I streamed all the time. I think I streamed like 5 days a week for some pretty ungodly hours, which I stopped because it was a lot. And I've kind of switched a lot how I do content, because for me, how I do it has changed so much. I mean, I'm at the point now, I look down the line, I have like a whole planning system for like, I look at series now, basically, for how I make content, and then how I stream. My streaming is based on the games I play, but really like the YouTube series I'm making, the YouTube videos I'm making is how that kind of works. So I'll pre-plan out like a whole series, what I want to do with it, whether single player, multiplayer. I have a really detailed planning process for that now, and then I'll pick my schedule kind of off that. I've switched this year to start to do weekends. So on weekends, I will stream like a single player game in the morning, and then a multiplayer game in the afternoon on both days for both of those. And then I'll go and I'll edit them in the week when I have time to make them into videos and stuff like that. So right now it's looking like just weekends. I tend to stream maybe a little bit on Fridays and stuff like that. But I've switched around a lot. For anyone who wants to like stream and to do well in streaming, don't do that. Switching around a lot is an easy way just to make people not watch you, to be honest, because people are habitual. We're all habitual. We build habits for what we do, what we watch, and things like that. And streaming is one of those things that if you watch streaming for streaming, it's to interact. And if it's not happening on the same day, you will lose many people. So I don't do what I do there. But I'm going to try and make it weekends and hopefully stick to that if my schedule allows for it.
Yeah, so you touch base a little bit on like there's some things you started off doing that you've changed. Also going back to the editing, you're like trying to balance like, okay, I want to make this look really good, but I don't want to spend a year editing one video. So like, Are there any other things related to that you started off doing that maybe like someone who's first starting off streaming or making content, like kind of like things to avoid starting out, like, maybe
Sure.
spending too much time editing or, having a consistent schedule, things like that?
Consistency is number one, no matter what space you inhabit in content creation, whether it's YouTube or Twitch. It's consistency that will build you up. Because people, like I said, they're habitual. They want to have things happen at a certain time consistently. And I think I had a tiny bit of an ego in the beginning with what I did, because I was like, well, I really like what I'm making. Other people will like what I'm making. I could do this whenever I want, and it'll grow. That's not true. I mean, you can make amazing stuff, but you need to be habitual, with some exceptions, of course. So my biggest piece of advice is consistency. And start with YouTube.
Start streaming on YouTube?
No, consistency on YouTube. That's my
consistency on YouTube.
Like
Gotcha.
with uploading, with putting up videos and stuff like that. Don't just put up a couple videos, wait a while, and do some more. You need a consistent schedule. I mean, match that to what you can do, whatever that is. Maybe that's bi-weekly, once a month. It doesn't matter. But having some sort of a consistency, certain day, certain time, that is huge. And that's something I didn't learn until fairly recently that really damaged kind of what I was doing, I would say. So consistency of uploading, consistency of streaming and things like that. And it really depends on what you want to do. I mean, I hope for many people they're doing what they want for passion, whether it's streaming or YouTube. If you want to just play games and hang out with a few people, you can stream and just focus on that, but still be consistent. But if you want to try and, get a little bit more popular and have people enjoy your content, start with YouTube and then go to streaming from there, because the YouTube space is just so much bigger. YouTube is a much better platform than Twitch in many ways. And it is, I think, in many ways, more rewarding to you to build the skills on YouTube and then go to Twitch, because streaming has its own unique skill set. A lot of that is being able to talk for long periods of time, learning how to not be boring. I was when I started. I looked back on a couple of my old VODs a couple weeks back, and I was like, I can't believe anyone watched this. But that skill set is you can build it a lot quicker for many people, I think. The YouTube one isn't, because YouTube, you have to learn marketing, you have to learn editing, you have to learn what people enjoy, you have to learn how to make your content entertaining, and that will help with your streaming too, because streaming to a degree has a little bit of that. And the skill set I think you build on YouTube transitions more to Twitch versus Twitch to YouTube, and it's just more beneficial long term to do YouTube. I didn't start that way, and I'd recommend anyone who wants to get into it, who is doing it now, who hasn't gotten success. I mean, if you've got success, you know what you're doing clearly, right? But I'd say start there. That was one of my biggest regrets. I didn't really put a lot of time and effort into YouTube in the beginning, and I regret that. Not just for, I think, the limitations of Twitch, but because I feel much more fulfilled with what I do with YouTube. Like, streaming is fun. Interacting with people, fun. Talking with people is great. I mean, I love that. That's why I got into this stuff in the beginning. But I think for many people, and certainly myself, when you get better at making YouTube videos, and you get better at editing, and you get better at telling a story, informing someone on something, it is a much more deeply fulfilling thing to do, in my opinion, too. So don't just hear make a YouTube channel and ignore it. That it's for 101 reasons. Absolutely do that, yeah. And use resources. Like, many things I tried to learn myself, and I should not have done that. Like editing. For a while, I just kind of screwed around on Vegas and tried to learn without going and looking for resources. I did a little bit at the start. I stopped for months, and then I eventually went back and really started to learn how to do it from other people. Like, don't ignore resources out there for learning ever.
Right. Yeah. That seems really important too. What would you say to someone who's like trying to be consistent, but also like kind of balancing their day job? And so, maybe they don't have a super large amount of time editing. So they're like, okay, should I just throw out this video to stay consistent, even though it could maybe use some polish, or, really kind of bank this and spend a few more weeks on it? Like, that seems like a really tough balance, especially for someone who's not making money for it, because you're like, you can't justify just like putting all your time into it.
No, and it takes a lot of time to be at the point where it can even begin to compete with even a basic minimum wage job. I mean, this stuff doesn't make you a lot of money until you're really far. I mean, I work. I mean, this does not pay for my bills. It helps a little bit, but it takes a while even to get where I'm at, let alone somewhere that's sustainable. But it's a tough call to know like where to draw that line, especially if you're busy. If you work a full-time job and you maybe have a little time on weekends to edit or do stuff and things like that, it's a tough call. I'd say it really depends on your space. But if you do gaming, which I think most people do, learning to edit, making every video a little bit better, you hear that all the time, is true. but go for lower on the editing scale. To begin with, try and make what you make and your content more entertaining and try and learn, and then just put stuff out. I'm not saying just like do 2 little edits and then just throw the video up. I mean, you can be on the lower end of editing as long as you're thinking about making your content better itself, making what you do a little bit better every time, and just slowly build up. I know I've talked to many people who do and don't have YouTube channels or stream on Twitch, and some of them are very nervous about that. They're like, oh, I want it to be perfect. I want this to be just amazing. And then they just don't do anything. And that will stop you before anything else will. So being ready to accept that in the beginning, you will not make perfect stuff, and realize that if you, especially with time constraints, if you can't put 10 hours into editing a video, putting something out a little bit less quality, but learning through it. Make sure that you are learning every time you do that, I would say.
Awesome. Yeah, that seems like really good advice. Because, yeah, I mean, because I help streamers and YouTubers with content all the time too. And it's like, it is a balance of like, yeah, we want to make this look as good as possible, but we can't spend as much time as like a $4 million feature on editing. It's like, it's really a balance. And it's also a question of like, does that actually bring more people? Like, does making a super intricate 3D motion graphic thing like actually draw more audience, or is that just kind of like a cherry on top of the cake, whereas you really need to focus on the heart of the content too?
Sure. And there's going to be what you want to do, and then there's going to be what people want to see, and they're different. They are. Yeah. They'll always be different, and you got to find what you can enjoy, but also what people want to watch, and that helps you, right? And there is an overlap there. And for anyone who's starting out, I always recommend, Daryl Eves, I think his name is. He's a guy who's been on YouTube since the beginning. He's got a book. I forget the name of it. YouTube Formula, I want to say. If you're starting out, read that.
I've read that, yeah.
It's a good book. It helps you get the understanding for the basics of things. And I think for many people, it'll save you a lot of time in learning to check that out. But anyone out there, utilize your resources. I'm not wildly popular or successful, so also don't listening to people like me.
I talked to some people last night that would strongly disagree with that.
I appreciate that, but I'm just saying that there are better resources, and make sure that you do your research. You go out there, you find all the things you can about this sort of stuff. Don't just run into things. Do your research. Find people who know what they're talking about, and you'll know. I mean, even if you're not adjusted to the space, and just make sure that you utilize every resource you can.
Awesome. So going back to the early days of Hammurabae, when you're streaming to like 0 to 1 people, could you just talk a little bit about that, and like how do you push through that? Because I know so many people who's friends that just are like, oh, I want to start streaming, and then they start doing it, and they there's no one watching. There's like maybe like one person who comes every 30 minutes or hour just to be like, hey, what's up? And I feel like it could probably be demoralizing. So how do you really just like push through that to stay motivated and stay passionate about the content?
It's tough in the beginning. And my recommendation for that is if you have a friend or a family member who will watch you and sit in there and talk with you, utilize that resource, because I tried to like keep what I was doing secret in a way. I don't know why. I didn't tell my family or friends I was doing it or anything like that. I just kind of did it. And I streamed to 0 people for a while. And it is rough. There's no other way to put it. I mean, I will go on Twitch and look at small streamers, and I'll hop in, because I prefer to watch small ones over bigger ones at this point. And I'll hop into small streamers all the time. And I'm always just surprised to see many of them, sitting there not talking, clearly unhappy that they're not getting anyone watching them, but also not talking or doing anything interesting. And it's as simple as, when you start out, even like that, it will be demoralizing. It will be rough. You have to talk. You have to learn to be a streamer, even if there's no one there watching you. Because like that skill set, you build that even if there's no one in chat, no one talking to you. Because it's just about learning public speaking. It's about learning to be mildly entertaining, and speak about what you're thinking about in an interesting manner. And you can learn that with no one there. And it's a case that you got to ask yourself, like, is this something I want to do? I mean, because people will come with time, but you also got to realize that even when you get a little bit more popular, there will always be times where there's no one talking. So you have to be able to talk all the time. But the way I always kind of justified it to a degree, I think, is you're still learning things. I mean, for me, I always like to build skill sets in anything. I just think as a human being, it's more interesting to just learn like a wide variety of things and different ways to experience the world. And to me, like, I'd have times I'd stream for 4 hours. I'd have 2 people come in my chat and leave at the beginning, and they'd leave, and I'd end it. It's like, man, that was rough. That was brutal. I'm just doing this by myself. Why am I doing this kind of thing? But then I remember, like, well, no, because like I am learning to be a little bit more confident in speaking to others, putting myself on a camera and talking. I'm learning to become, a little bit more entertaining with what I talk about and things like that, and just to become a better speaker. And even if you are doing it to 0 people, it's not like you're not learning. It's not like you're not still gaining something from it. So I think putting in that perspective is really key. And just realizing that it won't stay that way as long as you do talk and you do push through the beginning, because you'll find someone. There's always someone out there who will like you as a person, and who will want to watch you, and who will want to interact with you. I don't care who you are. There is someone out there, and it's just about sometimes waiting long enough for them to find you, or putting yourself out there enough that you will be able to be seen by them.
Yeah, it's because it's almost like you're kind of your own late night show, and even if there's no one on the other end of that TV watching, you still got to do it as best you can, because this is eventually, hopefully, it'll grow. And I mean, because streaming and making YouTube content, it's just like such a grind. I've worked with people in the streaming and YouTube world who are just like always on their phone, refreshing their like sub count, or like refreshing their follower count. And I get it, because it's like you're trying to grow a brand, you're trying to, do all those things. But I mean, in some ways, focusing on that number, I feel like can just drain that passion so much. Have you ever been in that world where you're just like, refreshing, like, I just posted a video, how many views does it have? Like 20, 25, like.
Yeah, I've been there many times. I'm not being completely honest about that. I think most people are, if they're going to be honest. It's unhealthy. It really is, with anything like that, where you just constantly are, especially if you have expectations of any sort. It is really draining. It will make you less passionate. It will make what you do worse. And it's just not mentally healthy. I mean, to be honest, if you are obsessing over your sub count, your view count on Twitch, how well a video is doing, outside the context of analyzing, there's a time and a place for something. If you were looking at the numbers to try and see what you can change, what needs to be done better, an analysis of your content and how it performed, great. That's good. You should be doing that. But if you're just looking at it and you're refreshing and you're looking and you're checking, you're like, oh man, when is this going to go, kind of thing, it's just going to hurt you, and it's easy to say that, but it's hard not to do that. But for me, what made me stop doing that, and I hope it would help others, is remember, it hurts you when you do that mentally as a person, as an individual, but it also hurts what you're trying to do. You will be less passionate. Like, I remember there was a time I got really quickly a lot more popular on Twitch. I really don't know why. I think it was because like the roleplay stuff I was doing was so like kind of new, and a lot of people were just like, whoa, and a lot of them realized they didn't want to watch it. And I remember I went from like averaging like 25 viewers to averaging like 50 to 60 viewers in a very short time span. And then that went away. And there was a period there I would like just look at my view count and be like, wow, I just got no viewers. And it took the passion out of what I was doing. I enjoyed it less. And I know just I wasn't as entertaining to watch, because I was clearly just looking at the numbers, and who wants to, do that, right? So it's also a case of, why are you doing it? It's not helping you. Just disconnect and realize that you only damage yourself when you do that. But I also say there's a time and a place. With YouTube, the analytics system is very well built. At this point, when you go into YouTube, you have the advantage that many people didn't have when it was newer, which is that you have an incredibly detailed amount of analytics to tell you why your content is doing good or bad. And Twitch has a little bit of a lighter version of that. So sitting down, looking at that, analyzing it, good, go do that. That's helping you. But then put it down, exit out of that browser, and go do something else. Go eat, do a hobby, spend time with your family or whatever. Get the hell away from it,
Right. Yeah. It's like maybe like once a week or once a month, go like analyze this and like be like, okay, what videos are successful, like average view count, average
exactly
view duration, and then other than that, you can't be just refreshing that all day every day, because I've been out to dinner with people and they're just on their phone. I'm like, what are you doing? That they're just like refreshing their sub count, or like refreshing a YouTube video they just posted. And it's just like so sad, man. Like, because it
Sure.
is like, I mean, obviously you've talked a little about like balancing your IRL world with the streamer world, and like that. I think that is so important, because so many of these streamers, especially the ones that are like actively in their like growth phase, are just so, all or nothing with it, that I mean, it's why I talked to Dr. K at Healthy Gamer. It's like, you gotta like balance this with like mental health and like physical health and, just like, actually sleeping occasionally. And
Of course. It's understandable though, I think, like, many people care so much about this. I mean, a lot of them are trying to make this into a career. Maybe they've already quit a full-time job, maybe they are just all in on something like this. And it's understandable that they're scared and they want to see it do well, or they care so much about what they're doing that they want to see people recognizing that and it doing well. And it's understandable that they want to do that, but it's not healthy. It's just not. And mental health is something that has gotten better in recent times, but many people, I think, tend to ignore. I mean, human beings are complex. We all have stuff going on, and things like that will just make it worse. It really will. So,
yeah. Is there anything that you do specifically, like, to help balance that? Like, go get a weekly massage, or just, hang out with, friends in real life, or stuff like that?
Yeah. I set a lot of time apart from everything to spend time with family and friends. Meditation, and that's the generic answer, but it's true. It really does help with things, stress and things like that. Making sure you take a deep look at yourself, understand your insecurities, your mental state, and being able to gauge that and step back sometimes, and just making sure that you have hobbies and people who support you and stuff. Like, I live with my aunt. We have a great relationship. She's wonderful. She's an artist. She makes, beautiful ceramics and stuff like that, and hanging out, talking with her, watching what she's doing and things like that. I mean, finding de-stressors and setting apart your personal life is huge. Even if you're massively successful, even if you've got 1 million subs on YouTube, you average thousands of viewers on Twitch, it doesn't matter. This is not your life, not your whole life, that is. I mean, this it becomes a part of who you are, but as a person, life has so much to offer, and you are doing yourself a disservice if you are not setting aside time to go experience all the other things that you will be passionate about. I mean, I also have known streamers and content creators who will set aside things I know they love to do this. I've done it myself. I still do it sometimes, and that's not right. And again, you owe it to yourself to experience life even while you're trying to do something like this. So just recognizing that, I think, is important.
Yeah, that seems like really good advice. So being a historical buff as you are, if you were to travel back into any historical time period, right, where and when would you choose?
That's a tough one. Man, funny, I was asked that recently by someone too, and that also just like, that threw me for a loop. Can I get two answers?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. The first one I would love to see, most likely, would be like the first couple of cities, like Ur and Uruk, like at the beginning of like human civilization and organization. I'd love to go back to see that. Just because one of my favorite things about history is just seeing how events, people, nations influence everything else, and how you can just see the ripple effects of them all throughout history and how they're still affecting the modern world. And if you look deep, you can see that. And to me, I mean, that's ground zero for everything that we are. And to go and see just the beginnings of us beginning to organize, I think would just be incredible to see. Just because I almost wonder if there would be a little bit of a sense of that. I'd be very curious to see if almost they knew that where they were and what they were doing was just so unique and so momentous. Maybe not. I think we all get used to our circumstances and our situation. We're like, oh, this is completely normal, right? I mean, look at where we're at right now. Try to explain this to someone 100 years ago, right? But
right.
I don't know.
I'd imagine they're just like, I'm trying not to get eaten and like, die of starvation.
Listen, I just want to make food so I can eat and feed my kids, of course.
They're not like, we're at the pivotal moment in history where humans are.
No. I mean, probably not, but man, it'd be so cool to see that, and just, man, the culture, what the people were like. I couldn't communicate with them, of course, but yeah, that'd be incredible. The other one I would love to see would be obviously Rome at its height. I know that's a little generic. Everyone loves Rome. I was a Rome kid, of course, obsessed with their history and stuff. But to me, the aspect that's so appealing is they were such a cosmopolitan society and such an interesting era. I mean, I think many books and many movies and stuff, they portray Rome as just being, very, very simple, very like this one group of people, but it wasn't. It was such, especially when they started to grow and were stronger, a cosmopolitan society with people from every part of the world there at the ancient time period, and being able to witness just all those different ancient cultures intermingling together in a place like that, I think would just be pretty incredible. I love places and periods of history that are very cosmopolitan, like the capital of the Mongolian Empire during, Genghis Khan in that period, which was also incredibly cosmopolitan. And when you have all these interesting cultures just together in one place, kind of intermingling, making like a sort of unified culture and stuff like that, or even just interacting, that to me would be incredible to watch. I mean, I'd love to just stand on a corner and watch people kind of everyday lives kind of thing. That'd be super cool. So.
Yeah, it almost feels like kind of like what America's like, where it's just a conglomeration of all these different cultures, or like places like Dubai and, all over the world. There's like...
Exactly. I mean, I've lived in a lot of places. I've traveled a lot extensively. I was lucky enough to travel a lot, and I'm not super young anymore. I'm in my late 20s, but I did get to travel a lot. And I always find the places that have the most distinct different groups coming together to be the most interesting. Cities and towns where it's just like one homogeneous group. It's interesting, but I don't want to spend more than a couple of days there. I'd rather be in a place, the U.S., big cities here, where there's just so many different groups of people. It's just so much more interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you know that you live in Los Angeles, right? So.
Oh yeah, it's really interesting here. Some of the people here are a little too interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, man, that's super cool. Yeah, I just found your whole world just like so fascinating, like the role playing aspect of it, the storytelling, but also just like there is like this educational world to it too, where it is like these people, most of the people in your community, I imagine, are just so well versed on the history of it and just like so passionate about all this stuff.
It's a chance to learn. I mean, I'm at the point now where I start a new series or a video or something like that, I'll read about it. Sometimes I'll even read like books on like what I'm doing to try to understand it better. I didn't used to do that, but I do now. So there's so much you can learn doing things like that too.
So looking forward into the future of your content and like kind of your whole world, like are there any like aspirations that you kind of like, man, I want to maybe eventually try to start doing this, or maybe branch out and do some other things?
So it's a case of I try and be very careful with like planning for the future. When I was younger, I had a habit of just planning for the best eventuality and often coming up disappointed, especially I'm very harsh on myself. I've gotten better, about balancing that, but I tend to be very like, if I don't meet my expectations, it's just like, what are you doing? But there's a lot of things I would love to do if I got the opportunity. I think like for what I'm doing right now, if I ever got bigger and more popular in a place like YouTube or Twitch and I had resources available to me, one of the things I would love to do, I know it would be very down the line and it'd take a time to get into it in terms of the resources needed, but I would love to utilize kind of what I've made with the roleplay stuff and a really good editing team and maybe some animators to make like a really serious roleplay series, in the sense of having it be multiplayer with players, like the really good ones who can voice act really well, play out maybe a game in this world or another one. It could be something like Red Dead even, which is very popular, and then make higher and higher quality level sort of series to the point that it becomes more, I mean, I don't think it could ever compete with something like what a studio would do, right? But I mean, building up the quality so you could have almost like a bordering on like a TV level quality sort of series with voice acting, maybe still tying in the game, because I think that'd be interesting, animating out some of the scenes and things like that, and have it become like almost like documentary meets acting, meets role playing kind of thing, something like that. I'd love to do that, but I mean the resource level needed to do that it's a lot, and I'm very far away from anything like that, I know. So I'd love to be able to do that for sure if I could ever get the resources for. I think that it would be pretty incredible, because I think obviously, I mean, you're in LA, I'm sure you are kind of tuned into a lot of this stuff. I think there is a pretty broad movement away from traditional media, things like, big movies. They're becoming less popular in many ways. It's much tougher to do well with them. TV is moving to streaming platforms, obviously, but a lot of it is going to YouTube. I mean, a lot of people's eyes, which are what matter at the end of the day, they're going to YouTube to watch those sorts of entertainment avenues instead of the traditional methods. And I think over time, there will be groups on YouTube that will get really high level, almost like studio level stuff on there for entertainment. And if I could play some little small part in that eventually, that'd be really, I think, pretty cool.
Dude, yeah, I mean, I'm not even the biggest history buff in the world, but I would love to see something like that. It reminds me of kind of like the early Red versus Blue stuff, but I don't know if you're familiar with that. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Love that when I was younger.
That would be so cool. And I know like people like and chip and all that commute, that would probably like just, they would be so stoked on something like that. But going back to what you're saying about the media movement, yeah, it's because when I first moved to LA, I was mostly, my main job was editing. Like that was my bread and butter. Like, I worked at a small studio doing that. And it is interesting because when I moved out here, even, which was only like 6 years ago, it was like, you want to work in television or film because that's where the money's at. Nowadays, it's like working for YouTubers and Twitch. That's almost like where you want to be in a lot of ways. Because
Sure.
not only oftentimes is the money sometimes better, but it is interesting because it's such a smaller community. And oftentimes, they treat their people better, which is
More personal, I imagine.
yeah. I mean, if you look at like people like Logan Paul and stuff, you would think that they just treat their people like crap, and maybe he does. But some of these other content creators, it's like, yeah, they have like 2 editors, and like they're like such a tight team that it's like they really look out for their whole staff and everything. Versus like if you're working at a studio, they have like 100 editors and no one even knows your name. They just like see you walk by in the hall. So
I think that's one of the incredible things that YouTube has done. I mean, they're not perfect by any means, but like one of the really cool things that happens there is they have leveled the playing field, I think, in many ways, because in the past there's no way you could ever compete with your entertainment with a big studio for a thing like a movie, a TV show, documentary, whatever it is. You just could not compete with their resources, and you didn't really have a way to consistently support or to get access to smaller groups or individuals, right? And YouTube has made that possible for so many people, which I think is incredible. And it gives many people opportunities to be in a better workspace like that too. I mean, I think that's amazing too, because for any especially big channel or big YouTuber or anything like that, they, like you said, they have a team, and it creates more jobs too. It makes the whole space more competitive for those sorts of things, I would imagine, I would hope. And it provides like the whole apparatus behind it, just better opportunities, which I think is really cool too. Because I've never been really deeply into space, but I do know entertainment in places like that, there is an issue, as far as I'm aware, with toxicity and just a really rough work culture for the most part. And I think it's a case of competition, hopefully creating more quality spaces for people in that area, whether it's editing, marketing, media management, any background kind of stuff. I mean, I really do hope provides quality of life increases.
Yeah, it definitely, the competition always helps, at least the people down the line. Like maybe the studio execs have to start paying more, but screw them, like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, sometimes when someone offers me a rate for something that's just so low, I'm like, look, I can't take this, not only for me, but because if I take this, then like everyone, like every editor is going to start getting paid less. Like it really is. Like you have to take rates that are going to help everyone,
Because the average is out. I mean, with any space, it's competitive, but you set the market by obviously setting standards for yourself. So absolutely.
Yeah. And then sometimes, the people get kind of mad at the green people coming in and then just taking whatever rate possible. They're like, yeah, I'll edit your feature for $50. And it's like, dude, that's like not good for anyone. Like it's not good for you. It's not good for us. Like, yeah.
No, it's just damaging. I am curious, one thing I would love to ask, because you are kind of more in this space, how much do you see an adaptation towards sort of online media and things like that with studios, entertainment networks, any groups you've kind of worked with? Like, is it really like a conscious movement towards those sort of groups, towards online spaces, or are they still kind of holding on to the past, I guess you could say? I mean, have you seen a lot of that yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting because, so I've worked with a few companies that kind of took the new media and tried to bring it into the traditional media. So I worked for this company called Awesomeness TV, which started off as a YouTube channel, and they got bought out by like Viacom and were kind of like trying to be part of Nickelodeon. And also going back to Red versus Blue, Rooster Teeth, they kind of like started off as like a new media channel, but then they tried to kind of like treat it like a large studio. And every company I've seen do that usually tanks. Like Rooster Teeth is like not doing well at all right now. And so it is really tough because it's like, I feel like the traditional media world is having a really hard time working with this new model of new media. Part of what I'm trying to do with this podcast is kind of explore that world, how people make money doing anything. Like, I talked to a TikToker a while back because I had no idea how TikTok monetization even worked. And,
Yeah.
and it was funny because he was like, yeah, they'll like send you these like rose emojis and lion emojis, but then those emojis are actually like money. And I was like, wait, what? So it's like,
Whoa.
it's kind of like a sub, but if you get like someone a tier 3 sub, it shows up as like a rose or something. And I think studios are built in such a way that it's really hard to accommodate these small teams and these small like niche worlds in a way that just like someone like Mr. Beast or like a big YouTuber is just so much better at doing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, even Mr. Beast, I saw in an interview recently, like he has trouble convincing TV or like studios to like give him a real show, which is like to me like mind boggling. I'm like, dude, it's Mr. Beast. Like, you know, it's going to be successful. Why would you even like think about that? But it is this weird divide because, I mean, I hate to say it, but studios kind of like are not the most efficient things, because that's why I'm switching back and forth so much. Like I do work for studios a lot of the time, but in the same time, you know, especially more and more now, I'm going more in the new media worlds, because you can also just do so much more with so much less in new media. There's so much more QC and like red tape to, you know, navigate in the studio world that it's.
Do you foresee that kind of starting to merge together at all? Do you think eventually like those sort of studios will start to merge more deeply with groups like YouTube, maybe have some of them come on to management or executive levels and hopefully change some of that? Or do you think it'll be a case of dinosaurs kind of getting the meteor?
I mean, I want to say yes, but after seeing even like YouTube Red, which was like, oh, we're going to do our own streaming service, and that lasted like 2 years. If they're going to merge, I think the traditional media people are going to have to do more like maneuvering to accommodate the new media people than the other way around, because it just isn't efficient the other way. If the new media people are coming in and we're like, okay, we're going to start, like, if for you example, we're going to start making my videos like they make Hollywood movies. It's like, that just doesn't make sense. like
Yeah,
let's get a $500,000 camera in here and like, you know, bring a gaffer in, and like, it's just, new media is so good about like making the most out of what you have, whereas studios are more about trying to market stuff. Like, basically like trying to find a market and making something particularly for that market so you can make money and keep doing that.
I mean, so maybe the marketing and then the money aspects of studio networks will slowly start to move, but it will hopefully come without everything that's been built on top of it, maybe? I mean, you foresee that perhaps?
Yeah, because the marketing teams for both studios and new media stuff is very similar. And I've seen those teams navigate a lot more easily than like the actual like production of all this stuff, because it's just so much different. I mean, you're doing all your stuff pretty much by yourself. I mean, editing wise and shooting wise, and you know, you're making more content than probably like some of the most successful studios in Hollywood, you know, in terms of just like how much content you're putting out there. And it's just, there's no way that a studio at this point, unless we just start filling, you know, exec positions with ChatGPT or something, there's no way that it's gonna work in terms of like just dollars, like adding up money.
If you don't mind, like I'm kind of curious, because you know all about this. Like, do you sort of have any concepts towards where you think like the new media will evolve towards? Because I mean, it's changed so much over such a short period of time. I mean, I remember 10 years ago watching this YouTube videos, like the really well done stuff, and it's like the low level stuff now. It moves so quickly, you know. And you've clearly been involved with both spaces, so I'm just kind of curious. Do you have any insights yourself into where you think it will go, how it will evolve more in the future, with like potentially some of the good marketing that comes with traditional media, and even like the money that we've seen start to flow into some of those spaces? I mean, do you have any concept for where you think that might lead into? Or
that's a really interesting question. I mean, one thing I've seen just in the past year is like short form in terms of like minute or less is just becoming so much more prevalent with TikTok, and YouTube has monetized shorts now, and just like Instagram Reels. It's like, that really is, and in some ways that's because, you know, us as a civilization are just becoming so more ADHD with things. Like, we can't focus for, you know, more than a minute, which, you know, isn't great as a society, but that's kind of where we're navigating. But in terms of just like content, I mean, it's really interesting because YouTube has, in terms of a platform, been around, like kind of withstood the test of time in a lot of ways. And that's why, some people ask me like, do you think it's still a good idea to do YouTube? Because it's been around, like, should I do the new thing like TikTok or stuff like that? And I do think like YouTube is still just like the platform right now for new media. In terms of streaming, obviously, Twitch is awesome, though I have some problems with Twitch myself in terms of just like how they treat their streamers and just like how they monetize stuff. I think in some ways YouTube is better, but having that, Prime sub is really keeping Twitch alive, I think. Like being able to just give you $5 for free and being able to do that 100,000 times with 100,000 different people, that's huge.
Self-subsidizing is really what it is. I mean,
the self-subsidizing Twitch is doing, but I don't know how sustainable that is. So that's why, I mean, a lot of successful streamers I know nowadays are not choosing to become Twitch partners because they don't want to only have to stream on Twitch. They're doing both YouTube and Twitch, which is really interesting. Because YouTube also is adopting the more like sub stuff and stuff like that.
It's moving that way for sure. They need to improve it a lot, though. I mean, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then like, I know people who stream exclusively on TikTok too, which is wild. That's the one social platform I am just like, I feel kind of like a boomer on. I use it and occasionally look at it, but it's just like, what is this? Like, what's going on?
It's so strange. My aunt will use it. Like, we'll be hanging out. She'll be on her phone, just watching dog video after dog video after dog video on there, and I'm just looking over like, I don't get it, but I mean, she'll just watch it. People will watch it for hours and hours and hours because it just feeds you and it knows what to feed you so quickly. It's very effective. But I'm the same way. I feel like an old man sometimes, just being like, what are these kids watching? I don't understand this.
Yeah. What's that new dance the kids are doing?
Yeah.
But honestly, like if I were to, buy, sell, hold, like I would buy YouTube right now because it just seems like even as big as it is, that's where the audience is, and they are continuing to put more features and innovate just constantly. And being tied to Google, they have the server space to pretty much do whatever they want.
Sure. The Google factor is really powerful, but I'm curious because you've talked to a lot of YouTubers, streamers. You're really in that area of entertainment, generally speaking. Do you think there's a lot of desire for another platform to appear, or are most people wanting to kind of keep YouTube in the sense that it's just so able to get their content out there to so many different people? I'm curious if you have any experience, thoughts, or insight to that.
There is a desire for that, but they've seen it go wrong so many times with things like Mixer that it's almost like, I think some people would rather YouTube just put out better resources for streamers, or someone like Twitch to just kind of get their act together a little bit more, rather than just be like, we need a whole new platform, because that's just so, I mean, if Microsoft can't do it, it's really hard to think that like someone else can't do it. Not to say that they can't. I'm sure like I'm gonna be eating my words in a few years when like TikTok starts their streaming platform or something, but at the same time, I mean, YouTube has just been just so consistent and in a lot of ways really good to their content creators. Like, they have their issues for sure, but like compared to things like Twitch and even TikTok, which I hear the monetization's a little weird on. I mean, YouTube just seems like right now the thing to be on. But this world moves so fast that, like there could be an app that just came out today that, starts to blow up as big as TikTok. But
disruption technologies are just so common nowadays. You really just don't know what is around the corner anymore. I mean, especially where AI is going. I mean, there's been a lot of news about that recently, and it speaks to just how much unexpected stuff is right around the corner, I think. Because we're in an interesting time in history. I mean, we're going to see some pretty interesting stuff very soon, I think, too, very quickly.
Yeah. Touching on the AI stuff, I've talked to people in the industry that think that it's going to be to the point where we can like make our shows with AI. So you can be like, I want to see Game of Thrones, but I want to see the last season redone with this cast, and I want like the dragon's not to die or something. Like, it's just like crazy shit that you might be able to just make your own show with AI, and it just CG generates the entire show. Like,
yeah, which is incredible. The issue there is there's already a lot of talk about like copyright issues and AI copying or artistic, expression.
Yeah.
Do you think that will disrupt, groups, people who do like editing or marketing or writing, or the people who tend to help media? Do you think that will cause a lot of damage there?
Yeah, in terms of editing, I am not worried because I still do editing a lot for money.
Hopefully.
AI has always just been a tool for me because like I do AI to make captions. Recently, like there's a new AI program that masters audio really well. It's called Adobe Podcasts. And it's just like, this is just a tool that just makes it so I can edit more. It's not necessarily like taking over. I do know a lot of writers though that are really worried about ChatGPT because writers get paid a lot more to like make a script than to like do revisions on a script, right? And so the idea is that the studios are going to start making the AI make the script and then just bring in writers to kind of polish it. And, there's talk of a writer's strike this year, which might, happen. Because the ChatGPT can just do the bulk of the work for them, and then they just come in to do touch-ups and actually make it like kind of make sense and edit. They're going to be losing so much money, which really sucks. But for editors, I think we're pretty okay because we know how to push the button to make the AI work. And it's really just going to make it where we can do more because it is really a tool. The AI can't like edit itself. You have to like use the AI to edit.
When it's used as like an auxiliary tool sort of thing like that, I mean, it like you said, it's only beneficial for you, like as an editor. I'd never heard of the things you just mentioned though. That's really cool. But like utilizing AI tools like that to make your job easier and make it go quicker, so you can do more, which I mean, I think helps you and everyone else in the long term and just improve the quality of it. That sort of stuff is amazing and really cool that's happening. I just worry a bit about when that gets further and further and when AI is more capable. Like, I mean, people talk about robotics and AI taking people's jobs, and that's a really real scary thing that I think our generations, younger folks who aren't the boomer generation, will have to worry about. And if it does stay auxiliary, so it helps you or helps me kind of thing, that's great. But I mean, I do foresee if it continues like that, potentially, when it gets advanced to even replace some much more human-based skills like that, which is worrying.
We need like very thoughtful and strong leadership to help us make these like decisions on like how we're going to navigate this in a way that benefits people, not just benefits the bottom line of profits.
Yes.
Because it's very easy with AI to just make more profit, but it's not easy to like build a structure that actually helps build up a community long term. I know a bunch of artists too, like 3D artists or like digital artists, and like the AI art stuff is really freaking them out. And I'm trying to convince them to learn it because I'm thinking like you can use this AI art to do a lot of like pre-visualization, like the stuff that like you don't necessarily want to do. Like hopefully people are able to use this in a way that they can like just make their work better, more efficient, easier, rather than just being replaced by robots, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, because I think there's a lot of any job, even creative ones, where it is busy work that isn't innately creative. Because I mean, I think the core thing that an artist does, or as like an editor that you do, or as like a content creator does, there's a lot of creativity in any of those jobs. Like there is. But then there's the aspects that you just have to do it. It's just the busy work that goes into the process. And if that's the part that it takes away and helps you not have to do, so you can focus more on providing the real value and the quality and the artistic expression, that's incredible. And the further along that goes, which is great. So I hope that that's where it will go with artists. And like you said, leadership. I mean, I'll try not to get political because, this is much more about content creation, but it's something I think that the global community just, they kind of ignore, which is robotics and AI and things like that. And it's not just people worry about things like defense applications, but I think the much more deeper one is the question of how it impacts human beings in our experience, whether it's through creativity or jobs and things like that, and understanding that it has value, but it shouldn't be taking away our ability to express ourselves is, I think, the really key to it. And
Yeah.
I do hope we get stronger, louder, and more wise leadership on that. I agree.
Yeah. I think that's really what it comes down to, is just having, leadership and politicians and lawyers that actually have people's best interests at heart, rather than have the people who are paying them's best interests at heart,
Exactly. Yeah.
In terms of content creators, though, all the AI streamers or AI VTubers I've seen are like,
Yeah.
it's very like interesting in terms of like, oh, that's an interesting gimmick, but like I'm not gonna start watching all AI VTubers because it's kind of seems like a gimmick. In the same way, like VR games, a lot of the VR games that first came out kind of seemed like, it's like, yeah, this is like interesting, but I don't want to play this all the time.
Sure. It'll have an audience. I just hope it's not super big. Just this week, I actually came across like AI VTubers. I didn't know that was a thing until literally earlier this weekend. I mean, it was kind of funny, but it was also like, this isn't quality content as far as I would call it.
I feel the same way. I'm like, yeah, it's an interesting gimmick, not something I'm going to consume like 8 hours a day. Like,
sure,
I think my brain would just rot if I just watched an AI like running around its room, like being like, is this entertaining for you? Am I like Mr. Beast? Like,
is this quality? I mean, because like the human connection, the human aspect of entertainment that makes it interesting is you just don't know what they're gonna do. You don't.
Yeah.
Human beings are wild cards. We'll just say and do stuff that you will never expect, and it'll be entertaining, and they can have deep conversations, even from a funny level, right? And I would hope, but I don't think you'll get that from things like that, and that's what will always be missing. So,
yeah. The imperfection of humans is part of what makes our art so interesting. Versus if we can just train an AI to make perfect art, that's not going to resonate in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the blemishes. I mean, like, ask me to name, 10 Renaissance artists. I'll struggle with it. But I mean, I've been to a lot of art museums. I've looked at a lot of art, and I love it because the emotion that it will generate for you is just so meaningful and deep. But it is the parts of it that aren't done right that can oftentimes be the most accentuating or make you think the most about it. And I would think that you would always struggle to make what at the end of the day is a set of like, functions or chosen things to value to do that on a truly meaningful level. I mean, it's just, I don't think you could simulate that. Maybe you can, as you said earlier, maybe I'll eat those words in 5 years, but I mean, I think you'd really struggle to do that in a truly meaningful way that could invoke that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. Well, Hammurabi, Zach.
Yeah.
Thanks again for doing this. This has been like a really awesome conversation. It's gone a lot of different ways, and I kind of like how we ended up just talking about like AI taking over the world. That's always fun.
Oh yeah, always a fun topic to get to. And thank you so much for having me. I mean, this was really nice. It's great chatting with you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your own insights on where you've kind of been with things. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks so much for listening. I want to give a shout out to my sponsor, Media U, and my producer, Natalie Roman. And if you're interested in staying tuned for more podcasts, feel free to follow us on YouTube, or you can catch us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.